Hi, Larissa I'm Shireen from Beirut, and you're
I'm in London right now.
in London. Good morning. And how are you doing today? How are you feeling about what's going on around us and your own practice at the moment?
I'm relatively okay, but I'm kind of tired because I'm working on two feature films at the same time. And it doesn't really help to have this political background that we're experiencing on a daily basis these days. It's very hard to gather the energy to understand our world and at the same time make relatable work.
Definitely. And I admire you for, your creativity and commitment. You're working on two films which we can talk about. And first, I wanted to ask you about something striking you said to me a couple of weeks ago in a message, which is that, we're witnessing the collapse of meaning, the total collapse of meaning. Because before we were talking about, bearing witness to violence, and then it was the collapse of language. And now you see it as the collapse of meaning, which is so much more radical. And you've been predicting, in your prophetic ways, you've been predicting this collapse, this destruction, this apocalypse and catastrophe for a long time through your work. And I wonder today, how do you feel about your power as an artist?
Um, Mm, I often get asked this question, and for me, being an artist is not really an option. That's all I know how to be. And at the same time, um, I find that our world is slowly moving away from really supporting the arts and culture. It is a bit of a shame what's happening in Europe as well, because Europe has, as opposed to the US, has always had, state funding that fund culture and arts. But now state money is actually more dangerous than private money because they actually dictate what artists have to say. They basically follow their government's um, rules or stance. And so it is quite dangerous. It's becoming very authoritarian. We expect, say, places like the Soviet Union or Russia, we say that, yes, of course, we know it's authoritarian, and of course, the government money is going to reflect what the government wants to say. But we don't think that, the West has this. But unfortunately, the West is more and more revealing how clandestine these, or like how cunning these kind of uh, suppression of freedom of speech or have been, in the sense that there is a lot of propaganda in Western media. There's a lot of pressure on art institutions from the government, from European governments, to actually curb what artists want to say. And this is the complete opposite of what the world that I thought we live in.
So how do you get around it? How do you find languages, visual languages, sonic languages, narrative languages, of course, to say what you want to say, respond to the violence around us.
I always insist on working with an Arabic crew, just because from the very beginning it has to be the actors have to speak in Arabic. It has to be all structured in Arabic to already take us out of what is, say, the predictable, like universal language that we all speak, which is English. And I think just with that move, it's already kind of subverts expectations of what the audience believes they can come and see when they look at an art piece. And I think from the very beginning, I wanted to defy expectations of what people expect from, say, an Arabic artist, and as a woman Arabic artist. And I particularly wanted to work big. I wanted to use sci-fi. I wanted to use all the tools that are available usually for like white men. And so in a way, I use Hollywood language. I use um, different kind of tropes that you don't associate with an artist. Well, firstly, because um, there is an expectation for an artist to kind of defy these ways of working and not to work with mainstream tools. And therefore, in a way, and in the art world, we always kind of sit um, kind of to the left of the mainstream and then criticize the mainstream. So in a way, I wanted to do it differently, where I actually sit in the mainstream and kind of hijack it from within. So that was kind of my method always, and how and obviously to make big budget films was important to me, because when I started working about 20 years ago, I had a curator who was very interested in my work, and she said, but unfortunately, your work doesn't fit in with what I want from artists from the Middle East. And she said, I love what you do, but it's she wanted more like documentary, handheld style work, and that for me was a clear kind of incentive. It gave me the incentive to actually work differently, because I realized that this is again a way of molding another people, or kind of forcing them to be in that box that that I find have been very common 20 years ago. Things are I think people are more aware of it now, but it's still the case where you find yourself being kind of categorized in a particular, even if it's from a sympathetic gaze, it's still kind of an analytical one. And I wanted to be the one to sit in the chair of the analyzer, rather than be somebody who sympathize with, um, or afraid from, or afraid of. So um, yeah, it's been kind of a journey of understanding how to subvert subvert that gaze, and how to use those tools to tell my own story.
Definitely, and you definitely forged your own language and forged or sculpted, because your work is there's so much, it's so material, there's so much texture to it, there's so much dimension and depth to it. It's dramatic, it's operatic, the lighting, the so it's really your own language that you've created. And at the same time, through my studies, I've been able to sort of go back and see regional movements. And there are movements, for example, since the 60s and 70s, looking at, landing on the moon in Egypt. And, Etel Adnan was really inspired also by the space age, for example. And also, of course, in Islamic cosmologies, the cosmos is really important. And then, of course, you have these, without getting into cliches or sort of melancholy, you have the motifs of, for example, the olive tree. You have the motifs of the clothing. You have the as you said, the songs, the lights, all these incredible moments that still attach you to the land and sort of root the work in the land. And that's why I was thinking about Fadwa Tukan, the Palestinian poet, who was always writing for the resistance and writing about the land and writing about being rooted and disrooted from the land. And so I find that there are so many common threads, and so you're responding to all of these movements, and also taking it into your own. And I love the word hijacking, because also in my research I've seen that a lot of these artists, especially in the decolonial era, we're talking about sort of really breaking apart Western narratives. So, for example, Hani Sroor, the filmmaker, she was talking about the fact that narratives are expected to be whole, in cinema, and that experiences in the Arab world are never whole, they're always shattered. And so she adopted this surrealist lens, also rooted in the land, for example, in order to reflect on this sort of absurdity. And then a lot of poets were talking about blowing up the poem, and the terrorist poet, which is so interesting. And in your movies, you have tunnels, and you have these resistance figures that sort of that are in conversation maybe with each other throughout your films, whether they're on the moon or whether they're in a bunker. And in your new film, Sunken Tales, it's interesting because the character, from what I understood, because I only got a preview, is reclaiming looted artifacts. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, for this film, The Sunken Tale of Losses Delayed, I was commissioned by the Werelds Museum in Amsterdam to engage with their collection. Their collection is very much about their colonial history. It's the Werelds Museum is like the British Museum in London. So they have a massive collection. Most of it is from Indonesia because it is where they colonized. But they have also objects from other countries as well. Some, of course, in those collections are donations, and I mean, that's how collections happen at museums, but a lot of it is looted. Um, so it was very hard for me to respond to this. My overwhelming feeling was that, wow, this is just, I can see colonialism right in my, right before my eyes. It's a very strange feeling. It's not just, I think when I was younger, I had a different relationship with museums, especially ethnographic museums. But being there and looking at their depots and which are all over Holland, um, and each one is more massive than the other, and then seeing how they curate the shows, and um, I felt very uncomfortable to comment on it. I couldn't just, pick certain objects and then decide to comment on those. I didn't want to be a curator in that sense because I didn't want to be like an artist curator who, gets out of this kind of difficult kind of position by just curating my way out of their collection. So I just decided that to make a fictional film, like I usually do, because I work with film mostly, um, and have a Palestinian pirate who's 300 years old. So she's um, a captain of a 300-year-old pirate ship. And this Palestinian pirate functions like a Robin Hood, where she loots from colonial ships and then gives back to the loot to the countries that these, um, colonies robbed. Um, so in this film, basically the pirate loots the collection of the museum, and then has a conversation with a Bethlehem souvenir maker, who's on his way to the big Paris fair in 1900, which changed the face of the world actually. She's having a whole conversation about objects and what they mean, and how objects really dictate narratives, and why the possession of those objects um, is gives the power to those who have them in their collection to tell their own stories, and why is it important? Why it's important to actually revise those narratives and give those looted objects to the countries they were looted from. Um, that's kind of like it in a nutshell, but it's more than an hour long film, and it's very much about the conversation between those two. So they travel around, they walk around the ship, and there are other people on the ship, and they're somehow all related to Palestine. They have kind of a trauma. All of them have a trauma, and they come from different um, periods of time. So everyone is running according to their own chronology. And the merchant who was, the film starts with the captain actually saving the merchant from a dinghy. And the merchant slowly starts getting introduced to all these figures, and he's very confused because he's from the 1900s. But it is a surreal film that talks about narrative history and who holds the key to narrate that history.
Yeah, definitely. And it evolves so much when you're talking about the sea and Indies. I'm thinking about also migrations in the Mediterranean today and all these histories of violence within, within water bodies as well. And then I was thinking about your motif of excavating objects, whether it's porcelain from the past, all these objects that are a recurring image in your films. And I was wondering, why is it important for you to excavate these objects? And then how do you sort of subtly shift that process of excavation, the archaeological dynamic?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the water of bodies and or bodies of water, sorry. But because in this film, the water becomes the archive. It's of all those people all these sunken ships. Imagine we didn't know anything about those ships until very recently because you couldn't really lift those ships because they're so heavy. So only recently did a lot of our kind of historical knowledge of what happened in these periods of time um, come to the front. Um, I always assumed that we always knew about those sunken ships, but the water is so deep that it's very hard to get them out. And when they get the ship out, it functions like a historical capsule because it's everything is there. So it just tells you so much. So it was so important for archaeologists or marine archaeologists to have that knowledge. Um, um, and I mean, in Black history, water and the ocean functioning as an archive is very important as well. So, in a way, I always kind of find affinity in when we talk about Black history and how the narrative is suppressed on that front, and how much trauma there is in the what's not excavated yet. And still lies beneath. So in a way, that's kind of how the film also functions. But in the future, The Eight from the Finest Porcelain, the one that you mentioned, is a film where a narrative terrorist, she calls herself a narrative terrorist. She wants to change the course of narrative and therefore wants to change the course of history and for the future. And what she does is that she buries different porcelain plates that have the Palestinian keffiyeh on them in various parts in Palestine. And the Palestinian keffiyeh kind of functions like a DNA of a people. Um, so she almost kind of posits these objects for future archaeologists to excavate and make sense of, because nothing is making sense right now. So it's kind of like a way to confirm the existence of a people, even if it comes 100 years from now. So it is a kind of a desperate, move to understand our political limitations and the absurdity of what we're going through. I mean, when we talk about the Palestinian existence.
Yes, and the future was made in 2016, correct? 2016, yes.
Yes.
And so it's been already a long time and a very influential film. And I was wondering as well if it was, the remains, the objects that mark the land are a way to claim the land as well, to sort of, again, root root the narrative into the land that they've been stripped away from, that has been taken away from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the film was those plates are actually plates from a fictional film that I made just before In the Future They Ate from the Finest Porcelain. I made Nation State, which is from 2012, and that featured those designed porcelain plates that have the Palestinian keffiyeh on them, and you see me in that building eating out of those plates. So I wanted to um, ch kind of check the boundaries between fiction and reality, because that is really the biggest narrative that's going on between is or uh, the biggest mythology that Israel is kind of pushing on the world, and Palestine is, you know, the one that we know, that a land with no people for a people without a land. Um, so it was kind of trying to tap into that mythology and understand what is fiction, what is real and what is fiction. And the only way I could actually justify the making of in the future the eight from the finest porcelain from in 2016 was to actually go and bury these porcelain plates in the ground. So after making the film, I wanted to go there, and I felt that that's when the concept gelled, was to take these plates and bury them in different parts of Palestine. So I actually buried them in 15 different locations in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, in Gaza, in Jaffa, the Dead Sea, you know, parts of the Mediterranean, Haifa, you know, in different parts, 15 different parts. Um, some parts are quite secure, and I know where they are. I had also the help of the different institutions when I was burying it in Gaza, because I'm not allowed to enter Gaza because I'm from the West Bank. Um, but and yeah, different parts of Palestine I didn't have access to, so but I did have help as well. Um, but they also what they question is also the role of museums, because museums usually collect my work, and it is kind of to preserve for the future. But I wanted them to collect the work in this instance to um, sorry, I kind of I didn't say it right. Usually, what the museum does is it preserves the past, but I wanted the museum to have a more kind of a different function where they preserve the future. So I wanted, in this particular instance, um, um, for them to collect the future, or preserve the future. So each place that the porcelain plates have been buried in has coordinates, and these coordinates, you can see them in different like Fabergé like eggs, and you can see the disc, and basically whoever collects one egg actually has in the contract, they have the responsibility to go replace the porcelain plates in case something happens to them. So that is kind of the whole idea, is that they keep on replenishing the porcelain plates if something happens. So it is a reversal of what we understand of the role of museums, and kind of an activation. And when I talk about museums, it's not really because it's museums that I particularly have a problem with, but because of I guess, structurally how we in general understand our place in the world. Whereas this kind of, how do we activate uh, the narrative, or kind of our position, in order for um, it not to always be just a commentary or a reference to the past or the present, but how do we kind of imagine a future as well?
Yeah, I was thinking of how life-giving your work is, because in the future there's so much destruction and violence, with the scenes of, the bombs dropping and the huge tanks and the barren land that's totally deserted, and the incredible fragility and beauty of and intricacy of this of these artifacts. So there's this element of always of life and creation and poetry in your work that it feels like it's a defiance against this culture of death.
But I think, I mean, we see genocide everywhere. I mean, we see, the killing of culture, the killing of language, it's happening on many fronts, and I think that's why I kind of always insist on reviving what is part of my culture. So the language is very important. So I always kind of oscillate between Fusha and Amiya, and which is proper Arabic, and then the dialects of each place. And I'm very interested in how, you know, how to keep languages alive, because I think pan-Arabism is great, but the locality of a language also is so powerful, because that's what you use, that it's also important to cultivate that. So I keep on trying to cultivate what is Palestinian. And I feel that if each dialect keeps on, cultivating its own, then we have something very meaningful going on, because it's a much closer to us in that sense. So it's always kind of a trying to find a balance between how much I can go with dialect, and what's the pushback with, Fusha, and how much I can actually refrain from Fusha, and when does it come in handy. So it's in a way also creating an Arabic sci-fi language is very difficult. So I feel that I'm coming up with my own kind of vernacular in that sense. It's very um sometimes I feel that I'm working by myself, and then I get feedback from, the Arabic, from an Arabic audience, and it all kind of pays off, because I understand how much people can relate and actually understand what I'm working with. So it's not kind of, something that I'm just in a world of my own and trying to come up with weird games that that fall on deaf ears. But so it's very rewarding in that sense, and I feel that we all kind of need it. We should all work and kind of try to cement our our own vocabulary, um, and resist this erasure of place, of language, of culture.
Definitely. And I was thinking as well about your role as an artist that's much more than the traditional role of the artist. In the studio, you're an archivist, you're an archaeologist, you're an historian, you're a linguist, you're, you're working with composers, or you're working in sculpture with set designs, with costume designs. You're also, as you said, infiltrating institutions. There's this element of trespassing as well when you travel to Palestine and visit these areas, and sort of excavate these hidden histories and locations. And so your role is so multifaceted, and that is part of the incredible process of making your work, and that is life-giving as well, especially this idea of, I feel, trespassing, not accepting the limits, the boundaries. I mean, of course, you're unsettling time and space and narrative. You're unsettling really the enclosures of this, culture of the war.
Yeah, and I think once one starts working like this, it becomes so rewarding. And I've worked with amazing um people in the music world, in the fashion world, and set design. And it's great to work in teams, because you get this feedback from everyone. So it's really always a great teamwork. I worked with when I worked with on the opera in 2021, I think. It's um, as if no misfortune occurred in the night. I worked with a Lebanese composer, and that was just an amazing process. It was during COVID, so we couldn't meet in person. Plus, he was in. I worked with Anthony Sahyoun, and he's based in Lebanon, and I in the UK. So we just had these Zoom meetings. We did the whole thing together through Zoom meetings. It took us 9 months just doing the music for a 20-minute opera piece before we even started filming. So that's how important that was to get the music right, because we again we combined two unlikely elements, which is um, Mahler's Kindertotenlieder and Al-Auf Mash'al, a Palestinian song from the Ottoman times. And they just we didn't want to kind of have the regular fusion of, it's I feel whenever you do fusion, it just immediately becomes, it depends on how you do it, but we completely wanted to break the rules from within, instead of kind of using say al-Auf Mashal as an ornamentation for a kind of a European aria, uh, and instead of make it an Orientalist gesture, we wanted to kind of have a dialogue between the two. So you have this kind of slowly Al-Auf Mashal infiltrates. It starts with Kindertotenlied, and slowly Al-Auf Mashal infiltrates um, the aria, and then in at the very end, the chorus is the Al-Auf Mashal answering Kindertotenlieder. So it's becomes like a complete um, it creates that third space rather than fuses elements together. Yeah. So it's always very interesting to insist on working with voices from within the Arab world, because I think you can only break the rules if you actually know them. And the same with fashion. I work with Omar Khouri often, who's a fashion designer from Jerusalem, and the level of expertise he has on on Palestinian embroidery and Palestinian um, costume design, and uh, yeah, the one that you are looking at is actually with a Danish designer here. And Omar did the designs for the opera for and um, and for example, he works in a very conceptual way where, the embroidery sometimes get laser cuts, so kind of to indicate absence, or so it's very conceptual, same as with the shatwe, the hat that Palestinian women used to wear. He kind of laser cut them instead of having them kind of embroidered. And but I worked with him a lot, and in my recent film with the Palestinian pirate, he designed the whole costume for her. And a lot of these kind of symbolic embroidered, there are a lot of symbols in Palestinian embroidery. And one of them that he had on her jacket was called a sea, which is like a wristwatch. And it looks like a wristwatch, but it is a traditional kind of symbol in Palestinian embroidery. And it worked really well in this film because the film is about time. So we kind of always work like this, and it's important that to work with somebody who knows all of this language in order to magnify the language, or subvert it. Yeah.
It's so amazing. And would you tell me why you chose this particular opera to begin with, and the whole story of, the grief poems written by Frédéric Rouquert, and how you adapted the text.
Yeah, it is actually quite scary when you think of it, because this opera is about the loss of a child. And when Milo started working on it, his wife asked him, please don't work on an opera that's about a, losing a child. And when he finished the opera, his daughter died. She died of fever, crimson fever, I think. And his wife thought that he was tempting fate when he was working on this. And when it's in light of what's happening in Gaza, looking at this opera and understanding that narrative and the context in which Mahler wrote that story, it's actually becomes a little bit scary how predictable that was. But in a sense, it's also not that strange that, to see this happen. It's just an acceleration of what's really has been happening for 80 years in Palestine. It's just because I'm so part of that context. I grew up in Bethlehem. I left when I was 15 with the first Intifada. Um, and it has been always the policy of Israel um, to erase Palestinians and to annex more land, to um, silently kind of displace people or by violence. But it's all these policies have been there for from the inception of Israel. So it's not very hard to see that this is what um, kind of that this is the crescendo of all of this. So, but unfortunately, this is a reality that we live in now, and I think I actually never really predicted the reality to be as bad as it is now. So, in a way, reality is worse than fiction in that sense.
It's interesting because I was looking at in vitro and the sea of the flood of black liquid and the explosions on Bethlehem, and it really reminded me of these scenes, that we're getting from Gaza, the ecocide, and the mass bombing that's AI, facilitated, which really accelerate the cycle of violence. So you did predict that. You envisioned that, in so many ways throughout your work, and yet we're never able to quite grasp what we're seeing, which is why I wanted to ask you about the lens. The camera, how the lens is a tool of documentation, and then how you subvert that. How you subvert. You blur the boundaries between reality and fiction. The grief and humor, for example, and all these elements to sort of maybe change that perception of this constant influx of violent images.
Um, I think when I first started working with film, I often wanted to kind of document uh, Palestine because I was constantly thinking it's about to be destroyed. There's a constant kind of unease with the information that I got, even constantly checking if my memories are there, if they are correct, if I'm imagining things. Because imagine we all have this. We're not sure if we remember, our childhood in certain instances, or if it was somebody who told us something that then we took to believe to be our own memory. But if imagine if you're also in a place that's constantly shifting, like your landscape is shifting. I remember, having friends that are just behind the wall that was, erected in the middle of Bethlehem, and now it just feels like, wow, this is like a land far away. It just, landscape or geography starts dictating your understanding of the world. It's very hard for the human mind to constantly renegotiate your your memories. We do that all the time, but I think on such a, and this is like a renegotiating on steroids when it comes to, what's happening in Palestine. Um, I have to pinch myself sometimes when I remember certain things from my childhood. We used to go to Gaza just to go to seafood restaurants. And that was just for like a day trip and come back. Now Gaza is a place that we're not allowed to go to, and I've not been there for 40 years. So, and I think for kids in Bethlehem growing up now, surrounded by the apartheid wall, Israeli wall, and from one circle, and then the other circle is Israeli settlers. Um, Imagine how their definition of what Palestine is. I mean, Palestine for me is like, oh, surrounded by the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea. For Palestinians who are growing up now, Palestine in for Bethlehemites is Bethlehem, because then you have to go to the checkpoint to go to another area in Palestine, which takes another 2 hours, or and you have to get permits that are impossible. And nowadays, I don't even think that anybody is going anywhere in the last 2 years. Um, but um, but this whole idea of that who you are as a people, that you are Mediterranean, yet you don't see the sea, is also it kind of defines what you understand as your identity. So geography really plays a big part in how you understand yourself, um, and that's, I think, part of what I worked on in my most recent film called Familiar Phantoms from 2023, is about that space. It's about me finally going to Jerusalem. Um, um, I was given a permit, because I think after 50 you're allowed to enter as a woman, a Palestinian woman who's after 50 they give you permits with no problems. For some reason they think you're not a threat anymore. Uh, so I was allowed to go and visit Jerusalem, and then I realized I almost had like a collapse, or like a breakdown, because I wasn't allowed to visit for more than 15 years. And when I finally visited, I realized I actually know Jerusalem much more than I know Bethlehem, because most of my childhood I spent in Jerusalem, because Bethlehem is just the suburbs of Jerusalem. And kind of it became like all of a sudden, a de facto, uh, you know, town in itself, is something that plays with your mind as well. We used to do everything in Jerusalem. Uh, so, um, and I realized how much kind of I psychologically suppressed this knowledge that I know Jerusalem, because I think it's easier to kind of exist not thinking that there's some trauma going on there. But it slowly kind of comes back to the surface, and then kind of you start again looking at your memories and try to renegotiate that. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's a long answer to your
Oh,
question. Yeah.
it's great. Thank you. So I'm thinking about distortions, deformations and distortions of, as we mentioned, language and distortions of time, distortions of space, distortions of memories. And then I wanted to bring up epigenetics, because I know you've been working with that a lot, and distortions in our DNA, in our actual biological makeup, due to this trauma, constant aggression. So it's a shared trauma. It's a shared trauma for the Palestinian people, for example, that's experienced this relentless assault that actually changes the body and the sort of neurological. And actually, I studied Tai Chi, and my teacher said that in Chinese medicine, it's known that the body holds these memories and passes these memories from generation to generation. And that's present in this film you just mentioned, Familiar Phantoms, which is so interesting. And I would love to hear more about your study of epigenetics.
I think when we were working on the opera, um, um, we were put with epigeneticists, and like so we were working with scientists. They put artists and scientists to work on a piece together, and spent, I don't know, maybe 2 years. And so I kind of heard a lot about the research and the newest research in epigenetics, and how much um, trauma is not just about, what you transfer by word of mouth to your kids and the next generation, but also something that is carried in your DNA. So, so that became kind of a reference in a lot of you see that already a reference in vitro, where the new generation who has not seen the face of the earth, and they grew up under uh, in a bunker underneath the city of Bethlehem. That's a film I made in 2009. So you see that they have the same memories as their parents, although they have never seen, rain, or they have never experienced, swimming, but they feel as though they have experienced all of this. And it becomes also a kind of a, a whole a film about the new generations and the diaspora, and how how much of whatever the diaspora has is from history being told by their parents, and how much of it is actually inherited through their DNA. And then the opera is the same issue of the opera singer says that she mourns of all the losses that happened, and those that are yet to come. And this kind of um, this perpetual kind of trauma that you're holding on to, and we kind of try to accentuate that in her in her dress as well, with her you can see that there's a DNA um, cord with the Palestinian embroidery. So that was kind of like kind of it's probably not easy to see, but it's kind of a nice hidden, gesture of that this is not just regular Palestinian embroidery. It has the DNA on it, and it's cut out, so it has this absence, and it's a constant maybe um, element I have in my work is, how do we define absence? How do I represent absence? By the removal of it, or is it by making a big gesture of it? How do you kind of reference nothing? But also there in Palestinian costume history, the indigo color is very big, because before the 1900s, they didn't have chemicals that make the color black. So actually, for mourning, they would use indigo, because they could make it very dark. And so people at funerals would actually wear indigo, not black. So they would take their best dresses and just dye them in indigo. And a bigger symbolic gesture to it was that you can never wear that off, because the color indigo is done with the fermenting process. That the only way you can take it off is by scraping it off. It's never kind of wears off as a color. And that is kind of a gesture that trauma it never leaves you. It always stays with you. And that is something that actually is part of Palestinian culture. So it was just kind of tapping into something that's already there, and bringing it into the opera, and kind of have a new dimension to that.
Yes, it's rituals of grief that are also incredibly beautiful and poetic. And I was wondering, in vitro, you have the character who's made of salvaged DNA, and really they're a composite of grief and trauma. They There's a refusal to sort of be attached in a nostalgic way to the land, and they live in the tunnel, they live underground. And I was wondering how that idea came about of creating this character and their connection with their mother, and that conversation that's really hard to, it's a conversation that's hard to have, where it's hard for them to listen to each other because the mother's attached to these memories that you talk about.
I think, I mean, the idea of an environmental collapse is something that is on everyone's mind, but it's particularly kind of present in Palestine, because I think it's kind of Palestine as it is now kind of functions like a microcosm for disasters of all sorts. In a way, it is part of kind of like our structure. In a way, when I talk about Palestine, it's not because I am from there, but because I'm from there, I know what's really happening, and it kind of I have more information about it. But I feel that it also comes with this kind of strive for finding a resolution for this, because I feel that once we have a resolution for Palestine, a lot of other problems in the world will come into place. It is kind of a defining problem. It is kind of um, it's a continuing disaster from the legacy of colonialism. And it's once we have put an end to that, it's things. Hopefully, we will be able to shift structures in the world in general, and kind of live in a world that can look at things not according to economic benefits and securities. So it's so that's how the idea came about. I mean, obviously the black liquids are. I mean, in the kind of simplest of readings, it's a symbolizes greed and environmental disaster in general, and oil, and um so I basically imagine in the film an apocalypse happening in Palestine, and in particular in Bethlehem. A group of scientists find a bunker underneath the city, and then they run to it and they create their own society there. And they build a cloning lab, and they manage to resurrect their lost ones through this in this lab. And so they have a whole generation of people who grow up under the city of Bethlehem, not ever having seen the surface of the earth, but still having the burden of all that history. And so obviously the new generation is resentful of the old generation and all the stories that they're telling them, and kind of rejecting the fact that for their elders, their presence is nothing more than a corridor of um, just a waiting room for them to actually come up and re-inhabit the face of the earth. Um, which is very much actually a comment on how you feel that you are on the precipice of history when you are part of the Palestinian narrative. In a way, we kind of like got ejected from history with uh, with the formation of Israel. And in a way, we kind of live in a parallel universe. And and somehow this is a theme that's kind of resonates with our present day reality, but also is constant in my work. It's this understanding of what traumatized identity is, how do you define it? Do we define ourselves by that identity, by that traumatized identity, or by this kind of the identity of resistance? Or what is left of identity if that's also you take that from its people? So it is a these are kind of like these are constant questions I have in my work.
Definitely, there's definitely a claiming of agency, right? And a claiming of land, and even the composite of DNA. It's a claiming of bodies, you know, that salvaged from dead bodies. There's always going to be life on this land. And I was thinking about the word apocalypse because this whole project is influenced by the Arab apocalypse by Etan Adnan. And in the foreword, Jalal Tufi, talks about the surfacing disaster. And then in another text, he talks about apocalypse, which comes from the Greek to uncover, which is so interesting to me. And so now I've been really obsessively thinking, why does apocalypse, why is uncovering, a catastrophe? And then I was thinking about your work and the prophecy, the loops of prophecies and the truth telling. And then at some point you talk about the future as the end game of colonialism. And I was wondering, is the uncovering of these dynamics of war a sort of a trigger that activates this end game of colonialism in the future?
It's a hard question, but I'm very interested in apocalypse actually meaning the revealing, because in a way, as we started in the beginning saying that I feel that things will get much worse before they get better, and in a way that almost feels like the bubble has to burst or it has to actually affect people in power before anything is done to it, because what is happening in the Middle East is just beyond words, but yet it doesn't affect people in the UK or in America. And I think until people start feeling uncomfortable, things will start changing because unfortunately that's how we function as humans. Like it has to be right in your face. So, I mean, let's hope it can actually happen without this this crazy shift. But um, yeah, in vitro, the whole idea of apocalypse is the fact that it kind of it's a culmination of things that happened, and in a way it is kind of, yeah, you could say it reveals what happened to make this disaster come about. So, and you know that if you keep on doing, if you continue doing things that you do, that an apocalypse will come upon us. So it's kind of a warning of not what not to do. um, yeah, but it's a very hard question, and we're just, we're in the middle of all of this. It's really something that is, I think, every human being on Earth should be really engaged with this topic and to understand uh, the mechanisms at hand and how much we need to change them.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for this incredible conversation and for all your work, and all the best for your next project. So as we mentioned, you have Sunken Tales and also In Memories of Times to Come, which we didn't have a chance to discuss today. But if you want to give a brief description for people to look forward to, and then we can wrap up for today.
In Memory of Times to Come is an art house feature film that I'll be shooting in September, and it's a film that takes off from where In Vitro stops. And so you actually see the clones freed, and the land is habitable now, and so they can actually come back and create their own society, their own ideal society. And there are two um, leaders from the previous generation who have their own take on what makes an ideal society. One of them thinks that you need to erase all the traumas in order for a new society to happen. And another one thinks that there is no way you can learn from your mistakes if you erase all that trauma, and there's no way you can build a society without its historical baggage. So these are the kind of elements at hand, and one of the leaders implants memories in the main character, and she starts remembering in a world where nobody remembers anything. And that's when the drama happens, when she actually realizes what actually happened to them.
Wow, incredible. I can't wait to see it. And I want to mention, since you mentioned these philosophical questions, which are very much a part of your work, that you collaborate with your partner, Soren Lind, who has a background in philosophy and who helps you with the writing and the conception. And we should definitely give credit where credit is due, and your practice is profoundly collaborative, which I find so beautiful, and I look forward to your next projects. Thank you so much, Larissa.
Thank you so much, Shireen. It's nice talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you.